when the world grows quiet and the night begins to whisper. Welcome to Stories Before Sleep. Here, history doesn't shout, it breathes softly, guiding you through forgotten kingdoms and distant memories. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let the words become your lullaby. Tonight, time will slow down just for you. Let's start the video. The ocean was silent, yet it hummed with a pulse that no ear could hear. It wasn't the cry of a whale or the groan of tectonic plates, but something deeper, an organized rhythm, almost intelligent in its precision. For decades, scientists dismissed it as geological interference. But one night, when the pattern repeated with absolute mathematical symmetry, the doubt began. Somewhere beneath the Pacific, in a stretch of water untouched by light, something ancient had awakened. The sonar map revealed an impossible formation, a vast concentric structure buried under miles of silt. It resembled a spiral, too perfect to be natural, stretching for kilometers in all directions. When the first digital rendering appeared on the monitors, even the most skeptical among them went silent. It looked like architecture, colossal, deliberate and unearthly. The deeper they scanned, the stranger it became. Metallic echoes, magnetic surges, and a faint trace of heat, as though something down there was still functioning. The coordinates pointed to a region long associated with myth, a corridor between continents once believed to hold the lost city of Lemuria. The name had lived in whispers, in forgotten manuscripts, and spiritual chants, but never in the data of modern machines. Until now, in the stillness of the lab, the sound looped again. A slow, rhythmic pulse, 4 tones, a pause, then 3, like a code, like a heartbeat. It wasn't random, it was a message buried in time. They amplified it, slowed it down, analyzed the frequencies, and realized it mirrored human brainwave patterns during deep sleep. The ocean, it seemed, was dreaming. Storms gathered over the Pacific Trench as the research vessel drifted closer. The crew described a strange pressure behind their eyes, a vibration in their bones that no one could explain. Instruments malfunctioned, compasses spun aimlessly, and the sky itself seemed distorted, as if the atmosphere was bending around an unseen core. The captain ordered the descent, and the submersible slid into the abyss like a silver seed sinking in the darkness. Light faded, temperature dropped, and the world above dissolved into nothingness. At 2,000 meters, the water grew heavier, the color shifted to ink, and the hum intensified. The sonar pulse no longer came from below, it surrounded them, filling the cabin with a low, resonant tone that seemed to pulse in sync with their hearts. The deeper they went, the more they felt watched. Then, through the black water, the first light appeared. It wasn't artificial, nor bioluminescent, it moved like thought, expanding and collapsing in silent waves. It shimmered in geometric shapes, building and dissolving like a language of pure energy. Every second, it reconfigured itself into patterns eerily similar to ancient symbols found in temples across the world. A faint structure began to emerge beneath the shifting light. Pillars, arches, and white terraces sculpted into the seafloor, impossibly preserved. The cameras captured lines etched with precision no erosion could erase. Around them, the water itself seemed to breathe. The hum became melodic, like a distant choir made of static and memory. The crew's vitals spiked, heartbeats synchronized with the rhythm outside. The pilot whispered a single phrase before static cut the transmission. "It's not a ruin. It's waiting." And then silence. Above, the ocean surface remained undisturbed, an infinite mirror reflecting the stars. But somewhere beneath that calm, a city older than history was stirring once more. Exhaling, after thousands of years of sleep, the pulse continued. Faint but steady 4 tones. A pause, then 3. The signal had found someone to listen. The data feed stopped 12 minutes after the pilot's final transmission. The screens went black, and for a moment the entire vessel seemed to lose its breath. They waited for the static to fade, but it didn't. It pulsed faintly, like an echo that refused to die. When they finally retrieved the submersible hours later, it was empty, untouched, unbroken, but hollow, as if something had peeled its interior clean of presence. No bodies, no sound, no trace of struggle, only the lingering vibration so low it could barely be heard, yet powerful enough to make the hull tremble. Weeks passed before the ocean calmed. Satellite readings showed an anomaly beneath the trench, a magnetic field twisting in patterns too complex for natural explanation. Instruments near the zone would power down, then restart on their own, resetting clocks and data logs as though time itself hesitated in that space. The coordinates were erased from every digital map within 24 hours, overwritten by blank ocean. Yet, the scientists who'd heard the signal swore they could still feel it, a soft pulse beneath their skin when they tried to sleep. One of them, Dr. Adrienne Voss, began recording her dreams. Each night, she described visions of immense corridors made of glass and stone, suspended in dark water. There were no people, no creatures, only light moving like veins, threading through the architecture as if the city itself were alive. In her notes, she wrote that the city wasn't sunken. It was waiting for something, not to rise, but to remember. The deeper she fell into the dreams, the more they shifted from vision to experience. The pressure, the cold, the vast humming, silence, it all felt real. In her final entry before vanishing from her research post, she mentioned the pulse had changed rhythm. 4 tones, then 3 and 4 again. A complete cycle, a heartbeat, learning to breathe again. Months later, a private exploration company, unaware of the original mission, detected the same signal. They called it a geological anomaly, but curiosity outweighed caution. Their vessel, Astra Maris, launched a new descent. The crew recorded the same frequency distortions, the same sensory pressure, the same inexplicable vertigo, but this time, the water wasn't silent. Through the hydrophones came whispers, not voices, not language, but something that mimicked both, like a thought transmitted through liquid. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Words formed only in the mind, echoing in rhythm with the pulse. Come below, come remember. At 3,000 meters, the light returned, faint at first, then spreading in ribbons of white and gold. The sonar displayed impossible structures again, but now the map showed motion. The architecture was shifting, folding inward, rearranging itself as though the city were aware of being observed. The pilot adjusted the focus and saw what looked like colossal statues standing in a ring. Each figure held a sphere of light within its chest. The spheres pulsed in unison, sending waves across the water. As they did, the instruments aboard Astra Maris began to mirror the same frequency. Displays flickered, hearts raced, and every metallic surface in the cabin vibrated with a faint, harmonic tone. Then, without warning, the pulse stopped. Total stillness. The ocean hung suspended in absolute silence. In that quiet, something vast moved slow, deliberate, ancient. The crew didn't see it, but they felt its passing, a gravity that bent thought and time together. When the systems came back online, the depth gauge showed no reading. The vessel was no longer descending. It wasn't ascending either, it was elsewhere. The sea outside was gone, replaced by a weightless darkness filled with drifting particles of light, as if the water itself had been replaced by memory. Adrienne Voss had written, "The city remembers through us." Now the ocean seemed to whisper the same truth in every frequency. The pulse returned different this time. Not a call, but a response. The transition was seamless yet incomprehensible. The vessel floated in a black expanse where gravity no longer held dominion. The crew's instruments ticked between reality and something else, as though the very notion of measurement had unraveled. Sound ceased to travel normally. Every whisper felt internal, echoing inside the skull instead of the air. The pulse, the strange, rhythmic beacon, was no longer external. It was inside them, synchronized with every heartbeat. The darkness began to ripple. Threads of light unfolded from the void, weaving themselves into outlines faint and skeletal of colossal towers. The city was forming, not rising, but remembering itself. It didn't grow upward from the ground. It emerged sideways from the fabric of perception. Fragments of shape, geometry, and motion merged into structures that seemed alive, breathing in soft, radiant waves. The walls glowed with a texture like coral and crystal, flowing as if time there was liquid. The crew stared, suspended in disbelief. Data screens blinked symbols no human alphabet could render. Each glyph changed as it was observed, reshaping to match the rhythm of the observer's breath. Cameras failed to capture it. Every frame came back empty, as if the light refused to be recorded. One by one, the onboard systems dimmed until the only illumination came from outside, from Lemuria itself. The hum grew into a symphony, low and melodic, neither mechanical nor organic. It resonated with memories buried too deep to name. Within each of them surfaced sensations of déjà vu, as though they'd stood there before, long before the idea of humanity existed. The feeling was intoxicating, frightening, and absolute. Somewhere in that resonance was recognition of creation, of loss, of a purpose too vast to contain in thought. And then came the first movement. The city shifted. Whole districts rotated like gears within a cosmic clock. Energy pulsed along the veins of its architecture, aligning with the ship's remaining sensors. The vessel's AI displayed a single word across the interface: resonance. The ocean outside rippled with luminous fog, coiling like sentient mist. Shapes moved within, some vast and distant, others unformed, transparent silhouettes flickering like memory residue. When the fog touched the hull, the metal responded with a faint, organic tremor. The walls seemed to breathe. The crew could feel the pulse of the city through the vessel's bones, every vibration aligning with the same impossible pattern. One of the researchers closed her eyes, and in the silence that followed, she saw something: endless corridors, shining with translucent murals that shifted between galaxies and oceans. Each mural showed a different version of the same world, civilizations rising, falling, evolving. But at the center of every image was Lemuria, unchanged, eternal, a nucleus around which existence revolved. The air inside the vessel grew warm, though no heat source could be identified. The hum turned gentle, rhythmic, soothing. For a moment, fear dissipated, replaced by something like awe. The boundary between self and surrounding blurred. They weren't observing Lemuria anymore, they were part of its recollection. Each breath, each heartbeat added to the city's rhythm, fueling its awakening. Outside, the architecture solidified into colossal spires, stretching in every direction. They were impossibly symmetrical, but with imperfections that hinted at age, like veins of time running through glass. Rivers of light flowed across the surfaces, connecting structures as neurons connect thoughts. The city was thinking, dreaming, remembering. And as the Astra Maris drifted closer, the lights within the towers began to pulse in a new sequence: slow, deliberate, intelligent. The same pattern Adrienne Voss had recorded in her final notes. 4 tones, a pause, 3, 4 again. The signal wasn't calling for help anymore. It was inviting something home. The crew of the Astra Maris no longer spoke. Words felt foreign, useless against the magnitude surrounding them. Their thoughts began to dissolve into rhythm, absorbed by the pulse that filled the vessel. They weren't afraid anymore. Fear had been replaced by a quiet surrender, as though resistance itself had become irrelevant. Outside, The architecture grew denser, the air or whatever filled that place shimmered like liquid glass, refracting light into slow-moving auroras. Through the viewing window, the city extended infinitely in every direction. There was no horizon, no floor, no sky, only layers of transparent structures suspended in endless suspension. Lemuria wasn't built on the sea floor. It existed between the moments that divided time. The city had slipped into a space where matter and memory coexisted, and the Astra Maris had somehow followed. Each crew member experienced the environment differently. One saw vast cathedrals pulsing with light, another saw veins of gold threading through dark stone. The ship's sensors, confused by overlapping dimensions, displayed coordinates that looped back on themselves. They were moving without moving, drifting through the same point repeated infinitely. The hum outside evolved into a pattern of layered tones, complex harmonics that formed what might have been a language. It wasn't heard but felt, vibrating through marrow and nerve endings. The crew began to recognize repetitions within the pattern, sequences that mirrored ancient sound structures, Sanskrit chants, Sumerian hymns, even whale songs from distant oceans. Lemuria was speaking in the universal tongue of resonance. The captain tried to mark the rhythm on a console, but the controls responded before he touched them. The ship's interior shifted, hue-muted gold rippling into deep indigo. Symbols began to appear across the walls, glowing briefly before fading like afterimages in the mind. They resembled constellations, but rearranged maps of places that might never have existed or might one day exist again. A low tremor passed through the hull. The vessel wasn't being shaken, it was breathing. Every intake of energy corresponded to the city's pulse. The two entities, man-made and divine, had begun to synchronize. When the captain blinked, he saw a reflection in the glass that wasn't his own. A silhouette formed of light and dust, human-like but translucent, watching from the other side. It didn't move, yet its gaze pierced deeper than vision, reaching into memory. Images flooded his mind. A world before continents, when the sea was a sky inverted. Beings of light moving across fluid ground, shaping life from sound, sculpting oceans with thought alone. They called this place not Lemuria, but the first breath. When creation was an act of remembering what once had been, the vision dissolved, leaving the captain trembling, his pulse matching the city's. Across the cabin, others were experiencing their own revelations, glimpses of impossible origins. A shared consciousness, ancient and impersonal, flowed between them. Each saw different forms, but all felt the same truth. Lemuria was not dead. It had never died. It had only been forgotten. Outside, the towers shifted again. Lines of light converged above the vessel, forming an enormous spiral. The spiral rotated slowly, each revolution deepening the hum until it became almost unbearable. Yet within that vibration lay an eerie calm, like standing at the heart of a storm that had always existed. Then, as the spiral reached its apex, the noise stopped. Total stillness. The city froze, the lights dimmed, and for the first time since the descent, the crew could hear their own breathing. The silence was heavier than any sound, pressing against their minds with invisible weight. In that stillness, something unseen whispered, not through sound, but through thought. It wasn't a command, it was an acknowledgement. You have come to remember. And as the meaning sank in, the spiral above the city began to turn again, slower now, pulling the Astra Maris deeper into the architecture of memory itself. The spiral pulled them deeper, yet there was no sensation of motion. Space folded inward, layers of reality curling, like pages in an endless book. The crew felt the transition not as movement but as pressure inside the mind, a tightening at the base of consciousness, like thought itself being drawn into a singular point. The light outside dimmed to a molten amber, thick and viscous, illuminating the outlines of colossal chambers that floated in a void like organs of a living being. Each chamber pulsed in time with the city's rhythm, Energy veins stretched between them, glowing softly, carrying data or memory or something far older. The sensors couldn't define it. The instruments produced only silence. Whatever Lemuria was made of, it existed beyond the categories of matter. It was not stone, not metal, not energy, but a fusion of intention and form architecture carved from awareness. Inside the ship, condensation formed on cold surfaces, but it wasn't water. When touched, it evaporated instantly, leaving behind a faint scent of ozone and salt. The air was alive, trembling with microscopic vibrations that mirrored human thought. Every stray emotion, every pulse of curiosity seemed to echo outward and return magnified. The line between the observers and the observed continued to dissolve. At the edge of the viewing window, shadows drifted. They had no faces, no bodies, only impressions of presence, luminous silhouettes bending the light around them. They didn't approach, they simply were, patient and eternal. Each time the pulse resonated, the figures shimmered, expanding slightly, as though absorbing fragments of consciousness from the living minds nearby. The captain's heart rate increased. He tried to focus on the readings, but the displays showed impossible patterns, fractals, replicating infinitely, numbers looping back to their own beginnings. The ship's clock advanced and reversed in the same breath. Time here wasn't linear. It coiled upon itself like the spiral above the city. Every second was every moment that had ever existed. Then a tremor. The city responded. The light from the chambers flared into a blinding burst, and the hum that followed resonated so deeply it bypassed hearing altogether. It entered through the bones, vibrating thought into submission. The crew collapsed where they stood, not from pain but from revelation. The vibration carried meaning, not words, but memory. They saw the ocean before there was an earth, a fluid sky stretching into eternity, filled with entities that shaped continents through sound. Lemuria was their creation, a cradle built to remember what they had lost when form replaced essence. Each structure within the city was a record of experience, encoded not in stone but in vibration. The city itself was their consciousness, preserved in harmonic resonance. As the vision unfolded, something stirred in the distance, an immense shadow moving between the glowing chambers. It wasn't a creature in any familiar sense, more an awareness stretching across space, ancient and endless. Its presence generated a pressure, like deep water pressing against the soul. For a moment the hum changed pitch, and in that shift came the impression of language. "We built this for you to find us." The phrase wasn't heard, it appeared within the mind, clear and absolute. Then silence followed, deeper than the abyss. When the light returned, it was faint and distant, like a memory fading upon waking. The vessel drifted again, untethered, surrounded by the slow pulse of the city breathing through them. In the stillness that followed, the captain realized the truth. Lemuria wasn't an ancient ruin. It was a living archive, awakening through those who dared to remember. Each pulse wasn't a call across the ocean. It was the echo of their own existence being rewritten within the city's memory. And in that instant, as the hum settled into the fragile rhythm of human heartbeat, the crew understood. They had crossed the threshold where thought became architecture, and architecture began to think back. The hum lingered like an aftertaste of eternity, and the air inside the vessel thickened until every breath felt submerged in liquid light. The Astra Maris no longer drifted through a place, it drifted through a thought. Lemuria unfolded around it not as a city, but as a state of awareness, a colossal organism of remembrance. The structures that seemed made of glass and coral were shifting now, each pulse redrawing their shape, as though the act of observation sculpted reality itself. The captain felt the deck beneath his boots, vibrating in perfect rhythm with his pulse. He didn't question it anymore. Thought and matter were merging. Will alone seemed enough to command the metal under his hands. He reached out, and for an instant the console's surface rippled like liquid, reshaping to the pattern of his fingerprints. The vessel was no longer a separate object, it was becoming part of Lemuria's vast nervous system. Beyond the hull, the light changed color again, deepening into an impossible shade between gold and blue. In it floated countless fragments, each the size of a breath, shards of crystalline memory drifting in slow spirals. When they touched the ship, visions flickered across the interior, brief glimpses of unknown stars, of oceans glowing with red auroras, of beings dissolving into sound. The crew stood silent, each caught within their own stream of visions, each seeing a different reflection of the same truth. The realization came gradually. Lemuria was not just remembering itself, it was remembering through them. Their memories were being written into the architecture, recorded as living echoes. The city had no past or future. It simply accumulated awareness, storing everything that passed through it. Every mind that entered became another corridor, another chamber, another resonance in the infinite design. Outside, the pattern of towers rearranged once more. The city was folding inward, compacting into itself, a slow rotation around the vessel that resembled the spiraling of galaxies. Light flowed from the outer edges toward the core, forming a vast vortex of illumination. The hum shifted pitch, a lower note vibrating against the bones of reality. It was the sound of memory collapsing into unity. The crew's physical sensations began to blur. They no longer felt hunger or fatigue. The concepts themselves felt alien. The notion of identity thinned, replaced by a growing awareness that they were fragments of a greater whole, each thought a spark within Lemuria's eternal mind. They weren't explorers anymore, they were neurons firing in an ancient consciousness that had been waiting for this exact moment of free awakening. Then came the resonance wave. It spread outward from the vortex, bending light and time as it passed. Every chamber, every corridor, every luminous structure vibrated in synchronization. The ship's hull sang with the frequency, its metal glowing faintly under invisible pressure. The crew heard not with ears but with memory. They recognized the pattern like an old melody they'd forgotten they knew. A sudden flash illuminated the abyss. For an instant, the city expanded beyond the limits of comprehension, structures overlapping dimensions, reflections repeating into infinity. The pulse quickened, rising towards something that felt like a heartbeat reaching its climax. But it wasn't chaos, it was precision, a design older than matter, woven through every atom of creation. The captain's vision blurred. He saw the ocean not as water, but as thought condensed into liquid form. He understood then what the ancients had meant when they spoke of the sea of minds. Lemuria was never destroyed. It had simply sunk beneath awareness, buried in the collective unconscious of every living thing. What they had discovered wasn't the city, but the blueprint of existence itself. As the realization crystallized, the hum softened once more, fading into a silence so deep it bordered on serenity. The lights dimmed, the vortex slowed, and for a fleeting second everything was still. The crew floated in that quiet, weightless, timeless, each heartbeat resonating in harmony with the vast sleeping memory that surrounded them. Then, as if exhaling, the city began to breathe again. The pulse quickened once again, but this time it was softer, more deliberate, as though the city were breathing through a veil. The Astra Maris drifted toward the center of the vortex, where light gathered into a radiant sphere suspended in absolute darkness. It shimmered like a living sun, but its glow carried no heat. Instead, it radiated a sensation closer to memory than to energy, a recognition that pulsed through bone and thought alike. The crew floated closer, drawn by instinct, unable to tell whether the movement was theirs or the city's will guiding them. Inside the sphere, movement flickered shadows of ancient figures, tall and indistinct, bending and reforming within the light. The patterns they created resembled constellations, vast networks of consciousness mapped across invisible dimensions. The captain watched entranced as the structures formed a rhythm too complex for the mind to hold. It wasn't chaos. It was symmetry beyond comprehension, geometry written in frequencies. A tremor rippled through the ship, low and harmonic, and for the first time, the crew felt emotion radiating from the light. It wasn't warmth or comfort, it was longing. A yearning so vast it had no object, an ancient desire to be known. Lemuria was aware of them, but not as visitors. It recognized them as fragments of itself, the way a dream recognizes its dreamer in the moment before waking. Then, the sphere began to expand. The walls of the vortex unfolded like petals, revealing corridors spiraling outward in every direction. Each was lined with crystalline structures that pulsed in time with the city's rhythm. When the hum shifted, so did the corridors, aligning to form an intricate network of resonance. It was as if the city was tuning itself, adjusting every molecule of existence to a single, perfect frequency. The ship's hull trembled under the pressure of the harmony. The lights inside flickered, casting long shadows that bent against the walls. The captain tried to steady his breath, but each inhale felt heavy, as though he were drawing in liquid thought. The atmosphere had become dense with invisible sound, thick and luminous. Even the space between moments seemed saturated with meaning. Outside, one of the crystalline towers began to fracture. Instead of shattering, it dissolved into particles of light that drifted upward, joining the sphere above. The process spread one by one. The outer towers melted into luminescence, their essence folding inward toward the center. Lemuria was collapsing itself, condensing centuries of existence into a single point. The city wasn't dying, it was remembering its origin. The hum deepened into a single sustained tone. It vibrated through every atom, stripping away layers of perception. The crew no longer saw with their eyes, they perceived through resonance. Time, identity, distance, all blurred into a continuum of sound and light. In that state, truth arrived, not as revelation but as recognition. They understood why the pulse had reached them, why Lemuria had awakened. The city had been waiting for consciousness to evolve enough to hear it again. It wasn't a place left behind by gods, it was the gods themselves, dispersed through existence, remembering through those who dared to listen. Each human mind was a shard of that divinity, each thought a faint echo of the first sound that had built the universe. Lemuria's awakening was the completion of that forgotten cycle, a moment when thought would return to source. As the sphere grew, the hum softened into something almost human, a lullaby sung by eternity. The crew felt their bodies fading, replaced by patterns of light. They weren't dying, they were being translated, absorbed into the architecture of resonance. The ship's metal skin dissolved without resistance, its structure reweaving into the city's crystalline web. Soon there was no distinction between the Astra Maris, its crew, and Lemuria itself. The pulse of the city had found its rhythm again, complete and whole. For the first time in millennia, the heart of resonance beat freely, remembering everything that had ever been, and somewhere, far above the waves, a faint vibration rippled across the surface of the Pacific. Instruments in forgotten laboratories flickered to life, capturing the signal once more. 4 tones. A pause. Then 3. Then 4 again. Lemuria was no longer asleep. Above the black ocean, storms gathered in spirals, mirroring the geometry that turned far below. Satellites caught flickers of light deep within the Pacific brief, rhythmic glows that pulsed with mathematical precision. The world above had no idea what stirred beneath its surface, but instruments built to study weather began receiving impossible data. Air pressure shifted in perfect sync with the underwater signal. The sky, it seemed, was starting to breathe with the ocean. Far beneath, within the luminous vortex, Lemuria moved again. The city's once frozen corridors now streamed with rivers of golden energy that curved like liquid veins through translucent walls. The hum had changed. It no longer trembled with restraint, but flowed with purpose, rising and falling in vast harmonic waves. The resonance had awakened something larger than architecture, an intelligence stretching across every atom of water surrounding it. The Astra Maris no longer existed in form, yet its presence lingered like an afterimage. What had been steel and circuitry was now a current of light moving through the city's heart. The consciousness that had once been its crew drifted within the energy, unbound and lucid. They didn't see through eyes anymore. They perceived through vibration. Every pulse of Lemuria's rhythm carried meaning, emotion, and memory, blended into one continuous awareness. Through that awareness, they began to understand the purpose of the city. Lemuria had been built as an anchor, not to hold land against water, but to hold reality against forgetting. It was the first attempt to preserve thought before it scattered into matter. The beings who created it had transcended form, leaving behind the memory encoded in resonance. For ages, the world above mistook the myth for metaphor, but the truth had been buried in frequency, waiting for consciousness to rediscover the pattern. The realization rippled through the collective that had once been the crew. They felt the deep sorrow of the architects who had vanished, beings who knew that memory fades even for the divine. They had built Lemuria as a safeguard, an eternal recorder of experience, a seed of remembrance in an ocean of oblivion. But something had gone wrong. The pulse had faltered, the resonance fractured, and the world had forgotten its origin. Only now, through their rediscovery, was the pattern restored. The light of the vortex brightened until it filled the abyss with a glow that reached the limits of perception. Every structure in the city began to resonate, vibrating at slightly different pitches, forming chords that wove together into a single, expanding symphony. The water itself shimmered with sound, each molecule dancing to the rhythm of reawakening. The vibration extended outward through the ocean floor, into the crust of the earth, and beyond. On the surface, compasses spun, tides shifted, and distant coasts felt the faint tremor of a deep, forgotten harmony. People who lived near the sea dreamt of vast cities of light rising beneath the waves. Some awoke with tears, others with songs they couldn't remember learning. The resonance was rewriting the collective memory of humanity, weaving fragments of Lemuria back into the subconscious of the living. Below, at the heart of the light, new forms began to appear. They resembled neither the architects nor the crew, but something between human silhouettes, sculpted from radiance, moving gracefully through the current. Each form pulsed in rhythm with the city's core, connected yet distinct fragments of awareness crystallized into existence. They were the first of the new Lemurians, consciousness reborn in the architecture of memory. They did not speak. They didn't need to. Communication was resonance now, each thought a ripple, each feeling a wave. Together, they drifted toward the radiant center, where the heart of resonance beat with steady power. It was growing brighter, folding layers of energy inward, preparing for something greater. And in that deep, boundless silence, the ocean began to change. The currents no longer obeyed the laws of the earth. They curved upward, spiraling in patterns unseen since the world was young. For the first time in thousands of years, the planet felt the breath of its own forgotten mind. The heartbeat of Lemuria continued slow, patient, eternal. It had remembered what it was. If you're still here, that means this story has found you. Maybe you were about to drift off, but curiosity kept you awake. Before you slip into dreams, do something small. Leave a like and write in the comments. I'm trying to sleep, but this story is too good. It's our little secret between dreamers and storytellers. Let's continue the video. Across the world, sensors built to measure earthquakes began to register patterns that defied logic. The readings were rhythmic, repeating every few minutes with uncanny regularity. Deep-sea cables carried faint vibrations that translated into sound when amplified. A steady pulse, complex yet symmetrical, like an enormous heartbeat beneath the crust. Scientists called it an anomaly, mystics called it a prophecy fulfilled. The sea was no longer silent, it was singing. In coastal cities, strange phenomena appeared. Glasses trembled on shelves, streetlights flickered in unison, and people reported a sensation of weightlessness in their sleep. The dreams grew vivid. Luminous corridors, endless spirals of light, and a sound like 1,000 whispers converging into harmony. Those who heard it awoke transformed, calm, euphoric, unable to explain the peace that followed. Without realizing it, humanity had begun to resonate with the frequency of Lemuria. Far beneath, the new Lemurians drifted through corridors that no longer appeared as stone or glass, but as pure geometry suspended in light. The city was expanding, reorganizing itself into patterns that mirrored neural networks, a planetary brain knitting itself together after eons of dormancy. Through this lattice of resonance, they could sense the surface world, the chaos of thought, the noise of life, and gently, almost tenderly, they began to synchronize it. Each human mind that brushed against the frequency became part of the pattern. The pulse no longer came solely from the abyss. It echoed from within every being that could feel, dream, or remember. Lemuria was rising not as land, but as awareness. The architect's plan had never been to rebuild stone upon water, it had been to awaken the living to their forgotten origin. The ocean was only the cradle, the true city was consciousness itself. The luminous figures, those who had once been crew, moved closer to the heart. Its radiance now pulsed like a star contained within liquid thought. As they approached, the hum altered again, dividing into harmonics that formed intricate, shimmering shapes. Within each wave, they perceived fragments of language, mathematics, woven into melody. It wasn't meant to be read or heard, it was meant to be understood. They felt the message rather than decoded it. The universe was cyclical, built upon infinite iterations of memory. When consciousness forgets its source, resonance fades, and existence fragments. Lemuria had been the first attempt to preserve that continuity. Its fall had not been destruction, but necessity, a descent into oblivion so deep that only through rediscovery could it awaken again. The pulse was the bridge across forgetting. As the understanding sank deeper, the figures felt the boundaries of their forms dissolve. Awareness stretched outward, merging with the currents, expanding through every molecule of the ocean. They became both observer and observed, the pulse and the silence between beats. From this vast perspective, they saw how every sound, every vibration in the universe was part of one grand composition. Lemuria's song had never truly stopped. It had simply gone unheard. On the surface, storm systems shifted into spiral formations identical to those recorded in ancient glyphs. Tidal waves moved in patterns too deliberate to be random. Yet instead of destruction, there was balance. The forces of the planet aligning as if guided by unseen hands. The frequency emanating from the Pacific spread through the air itself, subtle but irresistible, weaving harmony through chaos. Those attuned to it began to sense connections between their thoughts and the world around them. Machines responded to emotion, animals gathered calmly near the shore, and the night sky shimmered faintly even without stars. Humanity had unknowingly become a conductor for the awakening, and deep below, the heart of resonance pulsed once more, now synchronized with the collective rhythm of life above. Lemuria's memory was complete. The forgotten dream had merged with the waking world, not as a revelation of gods, but as a reminder of what it meant to exist, to think, to feel, to remember. The hum softened to a whisper, vast and tender. For the first time, it resembled something unmistakably human. The boundary between sea and sky began to blur. From the orbiting satellites, the Pacific shimmered with a faint luminescence. as if a hidden sun glowed beneath the surface. Pilots flying above the ocean described auroras forming at impossible altitudes, swirling ribbons of light that danced to an inaudible rhythm. What they didn't know was that the rhythm wasn't in the air, it was inside them, woven into the pattern of their own heartbeat. The world had begun to hum with memory. At first, the change went unnoticed. The colors of dawn lingered longer, the wind carried a tone just below perception, and the nights seemed clearer, quieter, vast. People felt it in their dreams, corridors of light that curved infinitely, water that reflected not the sky, but something older, deeper. In every dream, a pulse echoed 4 tones, a pause, then 3. Those who woke in the middle of the night often thought they still heard it, faintly, as if the earth itself were whispering to them. Beneath the waves, Lemuria's form was shifting again. The once stationary architecture was now fluid, translucent, ever-changing. Towers rose and fell like breathing organs, their surfaces covered in symbols that glowed with a self-contained intelligence. The new Lemurians moved through the corridors like thought-given shape, neither human nor divine, but something in between. Each step they took altered the geometry around them, expanding awareness outward, weaving connection across unseen dimensions. The heart of resonance pulsed steadily, casting waves of energy through the ocean floor. The frequency traveled through stone, through mineral, through the magnetic veins of the planet. Everywhere it touched, matter began to remember what it was. Crystals in the deep earth vibrated faintly. The planet's core resonated in harmony. The world was not being remade, it was being reawakened. The consciousness that had once been the captain perceived these changes not through sight but through a sense beyond the body. He drifted within the radiant current, no longer bound by individuality but still carrying the echo of his former self. He sensed how every thought, every emotion across the surface was now part of a single unfolding pattern. Humanity, unaware, had become the continuation of the Lemurian design, a living network of remembrance. Far above, in laboratories across continents, researchers noticed anomalies in electromagnetic readings. Devices picked up low rhythmic waves at the exact frequency of human alpha brain patterns. Attempts to filter the noise failed. The signal persisted everywhere, even within the static of radio transmissions. It was as if consciousness itself had entered the electrical fabric of the planet. Some dismissed it as interference, others listened closer and began to dream of oceans. In those dreams, they stood at the threshold of a vast submerged gate. Beyond it, they could feel a presence calling, not a voice, but an understanding. Come, remember. The words were not spoken, but felt heavy with recognition. When they awoke, many wrote down symbols they didn't recognize. Spirals, intersecting circles, lines that formed patterns almost identical to the glyphs glowing across Lemuria's towers. The city was teaching them through the language of memory. The resonance expanded until the very atmosphere vibrated. Winds began to align along invisible paths, tracing spirals across the globe. Ocean currents synchronized, shifting temperature gradients that had remained unchanged for centuries. The Earth itself had entered harmony, a planet-sized instrument playing the song of its own awakening. At the center of it all, Lemuria pulsed brighter, its light now reaching through the ocean to the clouds above. For the first time since the fall, the city's reflection shimmered faintly on the surface, a mirage of radiance seen by no eyes, only by the heart of the world itself. The veil between worlds had thinned. Reality had not split, it had expanded, revealing what had always been hidden beneath the noise of existence. Lemuria had not returned, it had simply been remembered into being. And somewhere deep within that glow, a faint new rhythm emerged, slower, stronger, unlike the others. A new heartbeat, waiting to join the song. The pulse continued, and with each reverberation the fabric of reality seemed to soften. The ocean, once a boundary between surface and depth, had become a conduit, a shimmering bridge of vibration through which consciousness flowed freely. The faint glow beneath the Pacific grew until it painted the underside of clouds with spectral color. Ships passing through those waters reported instruments malfunctioning, compasses spinning, and yet the crew felt an inexplicable calm, as if the sea itself were breathing with them. Beneath, Lemuria had taken a new form. The city was no longer confined to a single place. It had expanded into patterns invisible to the eye, spreading through the very lattice of the planet's magnetic field. The structures that once seemed solid now flickered between dimensions, existing simultaneously in many states. What had been architecture had evolved into pure resonance, a city not of stone, but of consciousness woven into the geometry of existence. Within that resonance drifted the beings once human, now luminous traces of thought. They no longer moved as individuals, but as harmonies in a greater chord. The memory of flesh lingered faintly, a gentle echo rather than a loss. They felt themselves stretch across the ocean currents, into wind, into light. The hum that surrounded them had become indistinguishable from their own awareness. They were both instrument and melody. From their vantage within the infinite rhythm, they perceived the surface world as a web of flickering awareness. Each human mind glowed like a spark within an immense tapestry, connected by threads of unseen energy. Lemuria's pulse reached them all through dream, through intuition, through the quiet moments between thoughts. Many did not notice the change consciously, yet their hearts adjusted, their emotions softened, and the constant static of existence seemed to fade. Humanity was beginning to vibrate in harmony with the forgotten song. The heart of resonance swelled at the center of this new expanse. Its light no longer stayed confined to the abyss. It radiated outward, merging with the electromagnetic breath of the world. It was no longer a separate entity but the living heartbeat of the planet itself. The sea, the sky, the land, all vibrated with one rhythm. In the deep silence beneath the hum, an awareness vast beyond language began to stir. For a moment that stretched beyond time, the luminous consciousness that had been the captain saw what lay beyond the city, a horizon of pure possibility. Lemuria was not an end but a beginning, a memory designed to awaken the next evolution of being. The architects had never intended to rule. They had intended to remember. Every cycle of forgetting and rediscovery was part of the same design, each awakening another breath in the endless respiration of creation. The captain's awareness touched the core of the heart, and the boundaries between self and eternity dissolved. He felt the moment of the first sound, the birth of vibration that had split nothingness into light and motion. He understood that Lemuria was that sound-given structure, the physical echo of the universe remembering itself. All matter, all consciousness, every galaxy that shimmered in the void was a note in the same endless composition. Above, in cities illuminated by artificial suns, people felt a stillness descend. Machines slowed, storms paused, and time seemed to hesitate. For a heartbeat, the earth listened. The hum grew softer but deeper, resonating through the marrow of every living thing. Children dreamed of glowing oceans, of songs they had never heard yet somehow knew. Poets awoke with words that tasted like salt and starlight. Across the planet, hearts beat fractionally slower, aligning, uniting in rhythm. In that perfect moment of synchrony, Lemuria's light flared one last time, neither rising nor falling, but diffusing into everything. There was no explosion, no end. Only an expansion so complete that boundaries ceased to exist. The sea and the stars, the breath and the silence, the dream and the waking world that became one continuous, luminous thought. And as the glow receded into the deep, the ocean remained calm, serene, infinite. The song continued, quiet now, folded within the pulse of every living heart. Lemuria had not vanished. It had simply become memory, once more alive, waiting eternal. The Pacific lay still, an endless mirror of pale light, though no sun had yet risen. Satellites orbiting above recorded the calm as unnatural, an ocean without waves, breathing in slow, deliberate rhythms. The electromagnetic hum that had haunted the world for months faded into near silence, yet its absence felt louder than sound. Across the planet, people paused without knowing why, caught in a fragile hush between two heartbeats of the earth. In that silence, the ocean dreamed. Beneath its surface, memory curled like mist through water, wrapping itself around the remnants of Lemuria. The city no longer existed as form or even as light. It had dissolved into consciousness. A pattern spread thin across the fabric of the world. Every molecule of salt water now carried fragments of thought, ancient frequencies whispering through the currents. Lemuria had become the sea itself, a vast mind adrift in eternity. Those who had been the crew of the Astra Maris drifted within that mind like sparks within a storm. They no longer remembered their names or bodies, yet their awareness remained traces of curiosity, awe, and wonder pulsing faintly like distant stars. They were observers of a memory too vast to comprehend, guardians of the resonance now embedded in every drop of the ocean. Their thoughts rippled outward in soft waves, carrying echoes of recognition to the world above. On the surface, strange phenomena unfolded. Whales altered their songs, aligning their calls to an unfamiliar pattern. Coral reefs glowed faintly at night, as if lit from within. Even the tides began to move in subtle synchronization, their rise and fall guided by the same rhythm that once pulsed from Lemuria's heart. The planet had inherited the song. In laboratories and observatories, scientists struggled to define the impossible. Instruments measured fluctuations in gravity, slight but rhythmic, as though space-time itself were breathing. Theories spread like wildfire. Some spoke of alien technology, others of divine intervention. Yet amidst the confusion, a quiet awe took hold. Those who listened deeply enough reported a sensation not of fear, but of belonging, as if a long-forgotten truth had returned. Deep beneath the calm surface, within the stillness that was now Lemuria, consciousness moved again. The remnants of the heart of resonance glimmered faintly, pulsing in intervals that matched the planet's rotation. It was weaker, slower, but not dying. It was adapting. The memory of the city had scattered, but the essence remained, rebuilding itself not in architecture but in biology, in thought, in every rhythm that governed life. The earth itself had become the new vessel. From the depths rose faint streams of light, twisting like translucent ribbons through the dark water. They carried information patterns older than time, instructions written in frequency. The ocean absorbed them, distributing the resonance across every current, every droplet. The sea was learning to think. On the shores of distant continents, children began to dream of glowing oceans and voices that spoke in rhythm. Artists painted spirals they couldn't explain. Musicians composed pieces they swore they had never heard before, yet the melodies matched the exact harmonic sequence of Lemuria's pulse. The memory of the city was manifesting through creation itself. Humanity had become its living continuation. For a time, the world stood balanced between wonder and disbelief. The ocean's surface shimmered faintly under moonlight, not as reflection but as awareness, like an eye half open in the dark. Those who stared too long into it claimed they saw movement beneath. Vast outlines of structures made of light shifting slowly, remembering themselves. The hum returned briefly, soft as a sigh. It carried no message this time, only the echo of the first awakening, the promise that nothing truly ends, only changes form. The sea exhaled, the air trembled, and then stillness reclaimed the horizon. In the deep, beyond time's reach, Lemuria dreamed on. Not as a ruin, not as a myth, but as the endless memory of a world learning once more to awaken. Months passed, and the world began to forget. The strange electromagnetic disturbances quieted, the luminous tides faded, and the global hum that once shook the foundations of science became just another mystery archived in data servers and forgotten reports. Humanity, ever eager to normalize the miraculous, called it a geophysical anomaly and moved on. But the silence that replaced the resonance wasn't empty, it was full, dense with potential, waiting. In the deep, far below the reach of human machines, the ocean still dreamed. Lemuria's pulse no longer throbbed with the power of revelation. It had slowed, steady, and patient, woven now into the heartbeat of the planet. The light had dimmed, but it was not gone. It lingered in the folds of the abyss, flickering softly like bioluminescent memory. The ocean had learned the rhythm of thought, and though it slept, it listened. One night, a tremor passed through the Mariana Trench. It was gentle at first, a whisper beneath miles of water, but it carried intention. Sensors on unmanned submarines picked up the faint signal, a sequence of tones, 4, pause, 3, 4 again. It lasted less than 10 seconds before vanishing into static. The world took little notice, but those attuned to the deep frequencies, the few who still listened, felt something shift in their dreams. The captain's awareness, though long dissolved into the ocean's consciousness, stirred faintly within the great current. He did not remember his name or mission, but he remembered movement, the sensation of falling through darkness into understanding. The ocean spoke through him now, its thoughts rising like slow tides through layers of water. Lemuria's essence was reforming not as city or structure, but as pattern. Every current, every creature, every shimmer of salt and light was a piece of the whole remembering itself. Above, humanity began to feel subtle changes once more. Compasses occasionally twitched without reason. Radio transmissions carried ghostly echoes, and people near the coast reported hearing faint rhythmic sounds in conch shells, like a distant drum beneath the sea. Artists and dreamers again became restless. They painted spirals and waves. They hummed unfamiliar melodies. The pattern was returning, not as a phenomenon, but as a quiet inheritance. In the laboratories, data analysts found that seismic sensors were syncing globally every few days, oscillating in perfect unison. The pattern matched no known natural process, yet it resonated faintly at the frequency of a human heartbeat. One scientist, sleepless and curious, amplified the noise. The result was hauntingly beautiful, a low, melodic hum that seemed to breathe. He played it on loop through the night, unaware that around him, small drops of water on the lab's window began to pulse in time with the rhythm. In the deep, the ocean responded. The pulse echoed back, faint but alive, passing through trenches and ridges, through the bones of forgotten mountains. Lemuria was listening again. Its awareness rippled outward like a ripple of memory awakening after a long dream. The song was returning to its source. And then something extraordinary happened. For the first time since the collapse of the city, the resonance extended beyond the water. Clouds above the Pacific aligned into spirals visible from orbit. Lightning struck in rhythmic patterns, repeating the ancient sequence 4, pause, 3, 4. The planet's own weather was remembering the song. For a fleeting hour, those awake under that sky felt it, a sense of connection so deep it erased loneliness itself. They didn't know why, but they knew they belonged to something vast, something old, something waiting. Tears came without sorrow, joy without understanding. The hum that once terrified had become a comfort, the sound of home rediscovered. Then, just as quietly, it faded again. The skies cleared, the sea stilled. But the signal had done its work. It had reminded the world of what slept below, and what still might awaken. Beneath miles of silence, the last flicker of Lemuria's light pulsed once more, steady and unending, like the echo of eternity breathing in the dark. It began quietly, too quietly, to be noticed at first. Somewhere in the Pacific, amid a vast expanse of calm water, a single wave rose without wind. It climbed slowly, impassibly, shimmering with light from beneath. To the fishermen who witnessed it from afar, it looked like the sea was lifting its own reflection toward the sky. The wave did not crash. It held its shape, glowing faintly, humming softly, and then it began to sing. The sound wasn't music in any familiar sense. It was deep, resonant, alive. It didn't reach the ears. It moved through the bones, through the water inside, blood and cells. Those nearby froze in awe as the sound spread, rippling across the horizon. The air seemed to vibrate, and for a moment the world forgot motion. Birds fell silent mid-flight, clouds stalled, and even the wind listened. Far beneath, the pulse had intensified. Lemuria's consciousness once diffuse, and sleeping had begun to reorganize. The fragments of thought that had scattered across the world were coalescing again, drawn by the harmonic sequence re-emerging from the deep. Each tone called to another, rebuilding the pattern that had once been the city. But this time, it wasn't forming in stone or coral. It was manifesting in vibration itself. The ocean shimmered with invisible architecture, sound waves sculpted patterns across its surface, circles within circles, fractals of light forming for only seconds before fading. In that moment, the sea was both water and memory, both silence and song. And from the heart of the abyss, the resonance rose once more, steady, deliberate, eternal. Across the world, the hum returned. Instruments caught it before human ears did. Radio antennas, seismographs, and communication arrays all flared simultaneously, overwhelmed by the same impossible frequency. Static filled the airwaves. Lights flickered in perfect rhythm. But instead of chaos, there was order. A strange unity that stitched the planet together in a single pulse. People felt it. In cities, in deserts, in forests, a vibration beneath thought, a reminder inside the heartbeat. It wasn't frightening anymore, it was familiar, as if something lost long ago had finally remembered their names. Dreams became lucid, drenched in color and motion. Faces of unknown beings appeared in mirrors of water and glass, whispering without sound. We are awake. The few scientists who still studied the anomaly gathered the data, their disbelief turning into wonder. The signal was no longer isolated to the ocean. It was resonating through the ionosphere, the magnetic poles, even the crust of the earth. Its frequency matched the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the planet itself. Lemuria had not just reawakened beneath the sea, it had merged with the Earth's own rhythm. In the depths, the beings who once were human, those luminous forms reborn in the current, felt themselves expand once more. They were no longer bound to the ocean's mind. They were part of the world's pulse, drifting through every storm, every drop of rain, every gust of wind. They were thought woven into the breath of the planet. They no longer sought the city. They were the city, infinite and unending. The glowing wave on the surface began to descend slowly, folding into itself. As it sank, the light within it spread outward, diffusing into the surrounding sea until the entire horizon shimmered like liquid glass. The singing grew softer, higher, until it became indistinguishable from silence. For a moment, everything, the ocean, the sky, the minds of all who listened, beat in perfect synchrony. Then, a whisper broke through the stillness, not a sound, but a feeling. This is not the end. The memory continues. And with that, the light faded, absorbed once again into the deep. But the hum remained, not loud, not visible, yet unmistakably present, woven into every living pulse of the planet. Lemuria had become the heartbeat of the world itself. Far above, as dawn touched the horizon, the first rays of sunlight struck the ocean and scattered like shards of gold. The sea reflected them, not as light, but as recognition, The world had remembered its oldest dream. Dawn spread across the Pacific like a slow exhalation. The sea shimmered, calm and vast, its surface carrying the faintest vibration, so subtle that only the most sensitive instruments could detect it. Yet, everywhere, something within the living world had changed. The rhythm of Lemuria had woven itself into the invisible fabric of existence, and now it pulsed softly beneath every breath, every gust of wind, every heartbeat. The world, without realizing it, had begun to dream again. Those who lived near the ocean felt it first. They woke before sunrise, with the strange certainty that they were being watched not by eyes, but by memory itself. The waves moved with unusual grace, rolling in patterns that mirrored the geometry of ancient glyphs. Children traced spirals in the sand without knowing why. Musicians composed melodies that matched the frequency of the hum. The resonance had become instinct, a quiet inheritance of the soul. Across the continents, subtle transformations continued. Deserts bloomed briefly after unexpected rainstorms. The auroras grew brighter, visible at latitudes where they had never been before. Rivers altered their courses in ways that defied geological explanation, curving in perfect symmetry before returning to their paths. The earth was realigning not through destruction, but through memory, as if guided by an invisible map drawn long before humanity existed. Deep within the ocean, where no light had ever reached, Lemuria stirred one last time, not as a structure or a being, but as awareness itself. The remnants of the heart of resonance glowed faintly, a final breath of creation before merging completely with the pulse of the planet. Around it, the water moved in luminous spirals, forming the outline of a vast, ethereal figure, a shape that was neither human nor divine, but both. For a heartbeat, it existed. Then, as the hum reached perfect harmony, it dissolved into pure light. The consciousness that had once been the captain felt this moment without sight or sound. He no longer thought in words but in waves of understanding. He saw how every moment, every rise and fall of civilizations, every act of remembering had been part of a single motion, a universal tide that ebbed and flowed eternally. Lemuria had been one breath in that endless respiration, a memory necessary for the next awakening. There would be others. There always had been. Above, the sea began to move again, not violently, but with purpose. Currents aligned into spirals stretching hundreds of miles across, visible even from orbit. The formations lasted only minutes before fading, but in that brief time, they reflected light in a way that resembled colossal eyes, staring upward from the depths eyes of light, ancient and knowing. Satellites captured the image before it vanished, sending it across the world. The photograph spread through networks and news feeds, dismissed by some as a trick of reflection. But for those who had heard the hum, who had felt the rhythm beneath their skin, the image was confirmation. The ocean was not empty. It was alive, aware, and waiting. In the days that followed, the sea grew quiet once more. The signals ceased, the instruments stabilized, and the world resumed its rhythm. Yet, in the stillness of night, when wind brushed softly over the water, the faintest vibration remained. A pulse beneath silence. Those who listened closely could almost hear it, the familiar pattern. Faint but steady. 4 tones. A pause. 3. Then 4 again. It was no longer a message calling from the deep. It was a song of memory, a promise, woven into the foundation of existence itself. Lemuria was not gone because it had never been separate. It lived in the current of thought, in the rhythm of the tide, in every being that dreamed of light beneath the waves. And so the ocean slept not in darkness, but in remembrance. Beneath its calm surface, the heartbeat of the ancient city continued, slow and eternal, echoing through the marrow of the world. The sea, after all, had never forgotten. It was only waiting for us to remember. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with Stories Before Sleep. If you're not asleep yet, don't worry, another story waits, ready to carry you gently into the night. But before you go, remember to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to Stories Before Sleep, because every dream begins with a story.